Now, whether you're going to be flying in a lot of wind, or for that matter, that first calm air morning flight, you want to be able to launch the airplane and put it in a piece of air so you can get a really good visual reference on the airplane, because we need to judge the sink rate, also the general energy state of the airplane, and also the ground speed, which is especially important for wind. Now, if you don't have a really good visual reference on the plane and can't see it well, you're not going to be able to set your trims for either the best L over D for wind or a minimum sink for calm conditions. You won't be able to also judge the airplane for drift angles, which may point you to new lift. You also won't notice when the airplane's in the sinkholes, and you probably won't notice when the airplane wants to lift up as well. So let's talk about how important your visual angle is to your plane and avoid dead spots. Now, hopefully every glider pilot should know when the airplane's flying away from them, straight upwind, that even though the airplane may be keeping the same altitude, as it's flying towards the horizon away from the pilot, it always looks like it's sinking. And as the plane gets farther away, it gets harder and harder to judge the airspeed of the plane and also whether it's climbing or sinking. Now, obviously, these low angle blind spots really only come into play at the end of a flight, whether they're coming from downwind, coming back to pilot position, or if you're way upwind and trying to fly downwind, where it gets hard to judge the airplane, in any sort of pitch or roll attitude when the angle is low and the plane is far away. Now, for thermal conditions or wind conditions, the worst place to put the airplane is straight above the pilot position, say 10 to 15 degrees off vertical here. It just gets really hard to judge the airplane. You can judge the speed, but it's hard to judge the bank angle, and it's also hard to judge the sink rate and pitch attitude of the airplane as well. So try to avoid putting the airplane straight over yourself. Now, years ago, I was helping this guy in the club, and he was an intermediate pilot. He was okay, but he had this habit of flying in this cone of visual death here, I call it. And he was really scared to kind of range out and go in these lower angles with the plane far away. So we'd always fly right above his head. And he could do circles okay and handle the airplane just fine, but he couldn't judge his speed at all. So what he'd do is he'd be flying so fast, and you just hear the plane screaming around, and a thermal would come through and you just blast right through the thermal. He couldn't tell that the thermal was there because he was going so fast. And then he'd get in this other cycle where he'd be flying so slow, and all of a sudden the plane would just stall and be snapping into his thermal turn and just falling out of the sky, and he'd almost barely recover before hitting the ground. So I told him, you've got to stay out of this cone. So I started teaching him how to fly out of the cone. I basically had him fly 180 degrees away from himself in crosswind to start with and to work his way in. And finally, he kind of got the idea about judging his speed. He was fine on the roll. Just once he got his speed and his trim set up right, he was able to fly, at a constant speed, and not constantly either flying too fast or too slow. So once I kept him out of the cone of death, he started doing a lot better. Now here's a visual reference chart, and this is the wind line coming across this way. Then I have a couple of other angles set up. I have a vertical here, that's 90 degrees to the wind line. And then I have two lines going about 80 degrees apart on the side here. This orange circle is our no-fly zone, our dead zone visual circle, our blind spot, where we don't want to have the airplane over the pilot position anywhere near in the circle here. So when I'm initially training people to fly in wind, I like to have them put the airplane down this 90-degree line. I'll have them launch 100, 150 meters, maybe up to 200, electric or winch, and then put the airplane right off perpendicular down that line, maybe 100 meters out, maybe 150 depending on the side of the plane. Now once they get out this line, they can see the plane sideways and a little bit of the underside as well. So it allows them to really easily judge the sink rate, the bank angles, the general energy state of the airplane. Then they can start setting up their trims and set their cambers to control the ground speed and their airspeed. And they can start looking for those little pieces of lift, those little threads of thermals, and avoid the sinkholes. And they can start to learn to read the drift angles too, and then be able to zigzag across the wind and find those little areas of lift. Now, if you're flying in a lot of wind and you're at a contest or even fun flying and you do a launch with an electric or a winch launch, you're going to end up upwind and at a pretty high altitude. But the higher the plane is and the farther out it is, just the harder and harder it gets to read, because you're basically reading the tail of the airplane as it penetrates up. It's really hard to tell whether it's in sink or lift. So a lot of times I'll maybe launch a little crosswind with electrics to get penetration. But if I don't have a read at the top of my launch here, I'll put the airplane in a better orientation in the wind. I'll just go ahead and hook a turn, come back down this way, you know, maybe about 45 degrees off my pilot position across the wind here. And I can see what's going on with the airplane. And I can do those better sink rate reads, get the airplane trimmed up real quick, set the camber for the conditions, and see if I can find some lift. And maybe I'm coming in this area maybe 90 degrees off if I know there's some maybe thermal triggers, some mechanical wave lift that may be happening or triggered off the ground or some sort of ground obstacle. And it'll increase my chances of finding lift, but also gives me a much better visual orientation on the plane. Now, as an expert, I can read the plane very well when the plane's straight upwind and up high, and the same thing with, you know, being really far downwind with the nose on too. But that's just because I have a ton of experience. I, you know, become one with the airplane after a while. But as a intermediate or beginner, try getting the airplane located in that piece of the sky to let you just see it and read it better. Is this going to make practicing and, you know, learning some of these skills for finding small pieces of lift and flying in turbulence and broken up lift just a lot easier. Let's go look for some lift here. Got some birds about 300 meters off my right wing up ahead, so I'm going to head that way. I'm in cruise mode. This is a light airplane, so I want to be, this plane needs to be pushed to go fast in these light planes. So trim feels good, so I'm kind of on the balance between minimizing the sink a bit. Nice flat glide. Plane just got pushed off to the right, so thermal getting into it, but I think it's more to the plane left. Hopefully you'll see it on the cam. There it is. Let's go thermal. Right up. So my pilot workload to get to that thermal is minimal. Once I went to cruise, it was trimmed correctly for kind of a medium speed. I didn't want to lose a lot of altitude getting there, because my air call was pretty much 100%. I knew there was a thermal there. And once I hit the thermal, still use my speed. Again, this is a super light airplane, doesn't want to really accelerate. So I kept it in the faster cruise mode until I kind of found where the core was, and I went to thermal 1. The plane slowed down. So I can tell by the hawks above me the core is pretty narrow, because they're not doing real big circles either. So I'm in my own kind of little area of lift, a little different than they are. So I'm still below them, but they're kind of up a little bit north of me. The thermal seems to be drifting this direction, kind of going southeast to southwest. Southeast to west. So that was a nice climb there. If you watch my stick, I'm really not having to do much work here. So I was just holding a little bit of rudder. Just correcting my bank when I need to, but the wings are pretty flat. And just because I played with the mixes and CG a little bit, it was far easier to fly now than it was 10 minutes ago. So it didn't take long to get the airplane from, 75 to 80% tuned. So we're at about 90. I think there's more tweaks that could be done, but it's flying very nice now. So this thermal's really diffuse and really weak. So I'm trying to keep my turns to a minimum. I'm just trying to find out what it's going to do and where it's going to go, because there's lift there. It just seems to be really disorganized. Feels good in one turn, and then it's kind of gone the next. Now, we had a big wind shift off of that side, and I came more to the left side, and man, just the bottoms dropped out. So I probably could have decided a little bit earlier to go a little deeper and far more right. I still have enough altitude to do this safely, of course. So let's see if there's the positive. Yep. Not much though. There's just a little streak and I already flew out of it. And again, the bottom's dropped out, so I want to pedal to the metal here because the bottom's dropped out so hard that I am almost not making it to the field. Especially with the cameras on board. Kind of like little spoilers up there. You can see how bad that sync cycle was in that piece of lift. Now the wind direction, look how the plane's going. That's straight into the wind there. So you can see how much the wind direction's bounced permanently down here from where the prevailing is. So prevailing was more that direction. Now the wind's all going that way from that piece of lift. And most of that lift is at much higher altitude. There's no way I could stay in it even at 100, 150 meters. This late in the day, that just wasn't happening. So let's change batteries, maybe go for one more.